dealing with a falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, the interview show from Brainstorm, where we talk to a variety of folks with the intent to spread critical thinking, compassion, and skepticism. This week, my guest is YouTuber Chrisiousity. She's made some great videos covering a variety of topics, including MythCon and the moral crisis in the atheist movement, the Real Peer Review Twitter account, which so many skeptics, quote-unquote skeptics, go to in order to laugh at the things that social sciences study, and rape culture in film. She tackles these subjects with critical thinking skills that I wish we saw in more of the skeptical community, despite the fact that she has a progressive slant. That's why, when I was thinking of the crossover between skepticism and progressivism, she seemed like the perfect guest to have on the show. With all that said, I'll throw you over to the interview right after this promo.
If your skepticism is socially conscious and doesn't take itself too seriously, you might like Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Also, I shouldn't have to say it, but vaccines don't cause autism, and Andrew Wakefield is human garbage.
As we've covered on, I feel like half of our shows.
We could just start every show with that statement. Andrew Wakefield is garbage, you are listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
No, it would have to be Andrew Wakefield is garbage, fuck capitalism. Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Life, the Universe, and Everything Else. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else.
Okay, welcome to the Skeptic Studio. Today my guest is Chrisiousity, YouTuber and prolific Twitter person.
Hi.
I guess a good place to start is maybe as much of your background as you're willing to give us or feel comfortable spreading on, sharing on the internet.
No, that's fine. So I'm a U.S. person. I live in the Northeast in the Massachusetts. Been here all my life. I grew up in a very working class family, and was working class myself. I worked with people, elderly populations, people with disabilities, cognitive and intellectual disabilities primarily, for a long time. And I got to a point where I got kind of burnt out. And you get to a point, I think, when you're in sort of direct services with people for a long time, and even case management, which I was doing for a while, where you just feel like you're constantly putting out fires, but nothing's really changing, and you kind of start to want to talk to people about changing ideas and attitudes and hoping that that will have a more widespread effect.
Right.
So somewhere along, and then I had, got married, had some kids, wanted to stay home with them. And because I'm just not used to not doing a lot of things at once, I decided to start spreading my ideas around, whether people liked them or not, darn it.
Yeah. And I imagine that keeps you relatively busy, at least gives you something to do, especially when you have kids. Like that's enough of a job of its own.
Yeah, but they don't always want their mother around either.
That's true.
So.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I keep myself going, and then I've just, after getting online and sort of connecting with other progressive people and other skeptical people, it's just sort of become a part of my life and a part of what I do. So
have you always been an atheist, or is that something that you came to as an adult?
Well, I don't identify as an atheist.
Oh, okay.
I sort of identify as agnostic, sort of. It's one of those things.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
I don't believe in anything supernatural. I wasn't raised in a religious household. And when I hit my teens, I guess, I went into a period of questing and questioning things. But I was never very impressed by or interested in organized religion. I wandered around sort of new age, what they like to call woo areas for a while. And I got to a point where I realized that just wasn't going to work for me. You know, there's in those worlds, they like to tell you that you have to sort of turn off your skeptical mind.
Right.
Turn off your doubts about things so that you can sort of access these, you know, you need to have, I don't know, not faith exactly, but you need to be able to sort of put those things aside so that you can
just got to believe hard
these
enough.
higher levels of whatever spiritual whatness you're going with. And it just, I finally realized that isn't me, and I'm not going to ever be able to do that. And that's okay. I don't need to, you know? So I cut ties with all of that after a while. But, you know, I still believe that what you might call a spiritual practice is useful and a good thing for people. But I don't think that it has to necessarily be tied to believing outrageous things,
right? If
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's becoming more of a common theme with like skeptical types, is like this. There's something to this, you know, mindfulness and meditation and appreciating things on a almost like a higher level, but without the magic, you know?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't need, like, I don't think I came to understand that the sort of the woo stuff doesn't really add anything to it, but a little bit of theater.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think there's a Douglas Adams quote about that, right? Like can we not just appreciate the garden without imagining there's fairies hiding in it?
Yeah. And like, if you want to just imagine the fairies, that's fine. But if you want to actually start, you know, talking to them, maybe you don't really need that. Like,
or like telling other people they have to worship the fairies with you.
Right. Exactly. Come on. If you think about it, let's say there were such things as fairies and they were around. We'd be bored by them.
Yeah,
there'd be nothing special about them.
Yeah.
They're only special because we've created this, like, they're in our imagination, so we've sort of built it up.
Yeah,
and
for
that's
sure.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, everything that exists is mundane, right?
Right. So that's why we have to keep making shit up.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Which is fine if you want to join a Dungeons and Dragons club.
Right.
You know, throw it out there. Do whatever. Read stories that interest you. Whatever you like. Sci-fi. I don't care.
Yep,
video games. But you don't have to necessarily go that extra step of believing in it. And then now that you believe in it, you have to order your life around it. That's not necessary. You know what I mean?
For sure. So I guess you kind of showed up on my radar last year, surrounding the MythCon debacle. So have you how long have you been kind of on the fringes, or have you been active within the skeptical community?
Really, that was the first time.
Oh, okay.
That I know Steve Shives, I know Christy Winters, I know a lot of the skeptical people who are also progressive who are on YouTube. But I kind of let them do that thing, like on their own.
Right.
When I had first come onto YouTube, I had some fairly naive ideas that maybe people were more open that they were in that sphere. Not just with progressive stuff, though that's, it's they're not open-minded about that.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But, also, one of the points that I was making when I originally came on is, there's this sort of rise of the nuns, what they talk about, right? But most of those nuns are not card-carrying atheists, but they could still be very useful to people who care about secularism, which I care very deeply about.
Right.
So, so I was interested in talking and building bridges between those kinds of worlds because I felt like I could talk to the people that they were just talking right past. To me, atheists are very good at talking to very specific types of believers, right?
Yeah. If you're not taking the Bible literally, then
there's nothing to talk about.
That's right.
Very little. And so you talk right past them. And so for people who aren't all that religious, they have some spiritual beliefs or ideas.
Yeah.
But they're not, hardcore anything or literalist anything. These people just aren't a part of the conversation. And I was interested in the idea of bringing them into the conversation, but I quickly realized that would just be a disaster.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to work.
Yeah. It sounds like you're talking about like people who are reasonable and you don't find those on the internet anymore.
No.
So one of the things that kind of came from MythCon was it to many women, it seemed to send the message that we don't care whether they're in the atheist movement or not, or whether they are involved in the secular movement at all. Do you kind of have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely sent that message.
Yeah.
It's just, it was a giant fuck you, like to women, to sort of, and the people afterwards who were trying to make apologies and not listening to women were much more concerned about whether we had knocked ourselves out being super duper fair to all the men and seeing them in the most charitable light that you could ever see them, right? Like
Right.
That's really where we needed to focus all of our intellectual energy. So that again became just salt on the wound. It was like, no, you guys either are completely ignorant and incapable of listening.
Right.
Or you're just saying, you know what, ladies, fuck you. You
Yeah.
know?
We just flat out don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I know, my local group was we were quite upset about the entire thing. And I mean, I've been a fan of Thomas Smith for a long time, and he had that argument with, Sargon of Akkad or Carl Benjamin, whatever people call him these days, on stage there. And yeah, I mean, it almost, from my perspective, it drew that line and said, okay, there's two atheist movements at least, right? Like there's the progressive side and there's the whatever conservative side, I guess you could say. The shitlord side. I don't know how they even describe themselves now, but yeah. And it just seemed like, okay, so those guys are on that side. Like that's pretty clear at this point.
Yeah. There's not a lot of, even capacity for, it's been a complete breakdown. And I think that things like MythCon have really put that into just the harshest relief. That, and, I mean, when you have so many people like Michael Shermer who are still in Skeptic magazine for some reason, I don't,
yeah, for some reason people still respect Skeptic magazine. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't. What? But anyway, it's like things like that. They don't seem to see that you can send messages in different ways.
Right.
Like you don't have to say out loud, I don't care about women's safety. I don't care about people of other genders. I don't care if you feel safe or if you are safe. I don't care. I don't care if you get hurt.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to say that literally when your actions speak for you.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So something else I was thinking, do you think that just what's happening in politics is how much of that do you think is playing a role in the way this division of secularists is kind of going?
I think it is playing a role, and I'm not sure exactly when it sort of started happening. That part of it was, and I'm absolutely sure about this, was that certain right-wing people found in skeptics a kind of an easy mark. And
Right.
they were sort of in there because, skeptics, the kind of skepticism that is practiced by online YouTube skeptics is very strange, right? So
that's right.
It looks at things very narrowly, and it's not about using your sort of your critical thinking skills and bringing those to bear, but just sort of waiting for proof of something. So if you're a group like the alt-right that operates on dog whistles and hiding your power and those sorts of things,
yeah,
you have an ideal group there, because they're going to sit there and wait until you've actually said, you know what, I think that we don't like black people,
Yeah. As long as you work around that, then they'll just give you unlimited leeway, right?
Right. Like you have to, it's amazing sometimes, and the number of times that these skeptical people have been surprised. There's a Nazi. Your friend's a Nazi. Remember all those times we told you they were a Nazi and now they're a Nazi and now you can't even deny it anymore.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't understand what happened. It's like, what happened is, it's a little like with Sargon, right? And I'm not going to say that Carl, or you could call him Sargon,
whatever, eh?
is a Nazi, but he's an incredible misogynist who has continuously done incredibly misogynist things, right?
Right.
Over and over and over again. It's not just the one tweet to Jess Phillips. It's a pattern of behavior, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Every single individual thing that you bring up, what happens is people come and say, well, are you being charitable? Well, are you factoring this in? Are you taking this into account? Are you doing this? And at a certain point, you have to be able to say, nobody who's not an orphan should need this much charity, right?
Right.
Like, this is, at a certain point, your Occam's razor has to start cutting stuff and saying, this isn't normal. This isn't how most people aren't constantly ending up, being super misogynist.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like the idea of charity or giving him charity it isn't given to that same level of charity isn't given to people who like look at what he says and take certain things out of it and criticize that. Like I find the same thing with like Sam Harris. Like if somebody criticizes a thing that he says, then nobody is willing to entertain those people. Like they just shut those people down. Meanwhile, Sam Harris gets charitable interpretation after charitable interpretation. And
exactly.
Yeah. It can be quite frustrating.
Yeah. And I've started, sort of saying to people, because what happens is that you have you get a playing field where one side always has all the handicaps, right? And the other side doesn't. And so I've sort of started saying things like, yeah, I'll be as charitable to you as you are to.
Nice. Yeah.
Like this is as much charity as you get from me because I can't keep, giving you more and more and more rope, knowing none of it. I'm not going to get so much as a string, right? Like it's not going to happen. So we have to be on the same footing here. Things have to sort of be commensurate and fair. So I'll give you what you give me.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. I was talking to Karen Garst yesterday and, her interview will come out, I think the week before I release this one. And she's going to MythCon this year and she's talking about how she doesn't quite get why people don't want to go and try and present these alternative explanations to this group of people. And I kind of had to be like, well, I think that what people are worried about is that they're not engaging in good faith. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about here is that like, if they're not willing to give you the same amount of charity as they expect, then they're not engaging in good faith. And it seems it seems hypocritical and a bit unfair.
Yeah. MythCon 5 is a great example of just a whole bad faith setup.
Right.
Right. From the get-go. So Karen Garst is going in and she's talking to a woman about whether or not women have achieved equality, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a question very similar to that. And the woman that she's talking to is someone who believes that women have always been superior to men in in every country, in every historical period. If you ask her about the Middle East today, she'll tell you that, oh, well, I hear about how the women have it, but then can you imagine how bad it must be for the men? Like,
right.
That's literally things that she says, and she says these sorts of things all the time. There is no, because she has a worldview.
Right.
That is that, I don't know, women have all the vagina power or something, or men are disposable. I don't, it's not even necessary to go into it, but the important thing is how she can't have this debate as it's set up because the very premise of the debate is one that doesn't make sense with her. Right. Like, it's not like she's going, so if she comes in and says, oh, women have equality now. Yeah. No.
But
that's not.
Yeah, but at least you can argue with that.
Like, that's fundamentally, but she's coming in in a dishonest way.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you look at, and this is something else that I keep bringing up to people, if you look at all the sort of panels they have, they're all asking about progressive ideas. You know what I mean? Like, all of them are sort of around progressive ideas, and they're not being brought in by people who are either friendly to those ideas or who really have expertise or knowledge about them necessarily either.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of like, don't you have ideas of your own?
Right.
Like, it's very easy to just bash other people's ideas if you don't feel the need to come up with anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Karen was also talking, like, in that same way, like, Karen was saying, Peter Boghossian and Sargon had a chat on stage somewhere where they were supposedly discussing intersectionality. And
Yeah.
I mean, these are two people who don't believe in intersectionality, and they don't like, so I mean, she figured it was an all right talk. I haven't listened to it, but it seems to me like there's no way that they're going to engage with the actual idea. They're going to engage with their straw man version of it, right?
At best.
Yeah.
At absolute best, because both of them sort of think it's, I don't know, the beginning of the Fourth Reich or something. Like if you
Right.
listen to, well, I know Boghossian talks about it as a kind of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl will talk about it as basically the end of all freedom and decency in the world. So, like, it's just this, I can't imagine what of any use these two would have had to say about that other than to be like, be afraid, men, they're coming for you. Run for it.
Yeah.
The Woms are coming.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like, yeah, obviously they wouldn't be engaging with the ideas in an honest way, I don't think, but.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like, what's the point? Really?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess something I wanted to ask about was a video you recently did about the Real Peer Review Twitter account.
Right.
And they kind of go through, I guess maybe I'll let you, what is the Real Peer Review?
It is a Twitter account, and sort of what they do is they take like screenshots of different articles they find in different journals, like academic journals. Some of these might be studies, others might just be articles, or opinion pieces, because they don't differentiate. So they'll take a screenshot or two from here or there because about something that they don't like. And they'll put it out there with like a lol or a, sort of a derpy kind of point and laugh kind of thing.
Right.
And that's it, and invite other people to laugh at it. And it's all sort of, and there's a real bent towards sociology and psychology into sort of what they would call the softer sciences. And it's really about undermining them. And they're very dishonest, because you get just a screenshot here, screenshot there. When you go and you look it up, oftentimes it's fine.
Yeah. If you actually read what it says, eh?
Yeah. Like, it's okay. What's your problem? And you can't really argue with them because they don't say what their problem is with it. It's just like, you can't argue with a lol.
Right.
Like,
yeah. There's no debate there. They haven't made a point or anything.
Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of these anti-social justice types have really glommed onto this. Is it just a matter of confirmation bias? Is it just because they like to laugh at things they don't understand?
Yes. Well, that's
short answer.
Well, partly it's that, and I think partly it also provides them a certain amount of, I don't know. They use it as sort of cover, or they sort of point to it as, see, like, and if you were just glancing at it and not engaging your critical faculties, it would look like, this person did say something silly.
Right.
Like this, or, that's weird. I can't imagine why people are doing a study on porn. Right. But then if you, sort of think about it and you say, porn is a huge industry in our world. And it's not necessary, and it's a real, part of a lot of people's lives.
Right.
So there's actually pretty good reason to look at it critically, as you would anything else.
Right.
Like, it's a human endeavor. And so if you're a human studying other humans, you want to study all the endeavors that they do.
Right, yeah.
You don't want to just study the nice stuff.
Yeah. It's almost like the things that people expose themselves to can potentially have an impact on the way they view the world. And maybe it doesn't all the time, but I imagine it can sometimes. I mean, that's why marketing works, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me to study that stuff, even if the headline of the title of a paper may not give a full indication of what's going on inside it. I don't know.
And, you know, it's because of their sort of lack of full honesty and disclosure,
yeah.
It's hard to even judge. You know, I remember me and Christy were going over and we were discussing it afterwards, and we were looking at, they were all upset about this study that had asked people to take photographs while they were out on this bike thing. It was either a race or a 5K or something. It just said photographs. And then they sort of looked at the photographs that people took and to see what they could make about that. And it's, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, I can see how this isn't groundbreaking. So we look it up, and it's in a journal of sports and tourism.
So this isn't this isn't science per se. That's I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of things out there. And, you know, this might have been something that was paid for by a company that sells bikes or something. Yeah.
You know, wanting to know. Who knows? You know, I mean, we don't... Are you going to stop? What would be the rule of what you can look at and what you can't look at? What's not important enough to evaluate or to analyze?
Right. You're not allowed to study that stuff over there.
Yeah. Who makes that rule and why? Where are these limitations coming from? And, I don't know. A lot of it is just to discredit, though. I mean, it really is. It's an essentially political, it has a very political bent, and it pretends not to, which is really the problem. I have a political bent, but nobody's confused about that.
Right, yeah. There's no, not over here pretending to be neutral type thing.
Yeah, and... I think that's fine. I think you should be open about your biases and whatnot. That's fine. But it's when you, and this will go into somebody like Sam Harris, who manages to convince himself he's bias free. He's tribalism free. He's the first in this new brand of human that doesn't have tribalism anymore, you know?
Right.
It's a superpower, apparently.
Yeah.
But the rest of us real mortals, on the other hand, you know.
Yeah, we're stuck with our damn biases.
Yeah. So,
I guess, do you see a way of, well, I guess I don't want to say, do you see a way of reconciling the skeptical movement with progressivism, but how do you approach progressive issues or conservative issues and maintain a level of skepticism knowing that you have a progressive bias?
Well, the first thing is I do engage with a lot of people, you know, I'm always on Twitter. So, and I am paying attention to their arguments. So when it comes to skepticism, I think you have to start separating. How do I explain this? All right. So, you know, when, Matt Dillahunty, said something about, you know, the Me Too movement and women who are coming to him. And he said, I believe people who say they've been sexually harassed. I would also believe people who say that they've seen a ghost, right?
Right.
So, and people were upset because it's pretty obviously
a bit of a false comparison.
Yeah. But beyond that, it's also, if somebody comes to you and says that they have seen a ghost, you have really no moral obligation to anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you need to do about that.
Right.
If you want to, you can entertain them. You can listen to what they have to say, but it's not like you're sitting there going, "Oh God, there's a ghost out there. I've got to do something about this." Right?
Yeah.
Like I've got to protect the other people from the ghosts. You know?
Right.
So, but if somebody comes to you and says, "There's a person of power and authority in this community that we're in who has assaulted me, harassed me, or treated me in a way that's really just beyond the pale," that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
And so you need to approach it a little bit differently. That doesn't mean you need to go, all right, I believe everything everybody ever says, no matter what.
Right.
Like, that's it. But it means that there is a moral obligation there that's different, because if you have information and testimony from somebody that there is someone in your community hurting people, that's something you need to do something about. You have now, somebody tagged you, you're it.
Yeah.
You have to think about what your role is going to be there. And you can't just treat it as the same sort of thing as somebody coming to you and saying, "Well, I saw a ghost," because it's just not. Right? There's, I'm thinking about, and a lot of it does depend on what your specific role and what you can do is. A lot of times you can't maybe do anything but stay out of the way.
Right.
Right? And let things progress accurately. But I mean, in Toronto recently, this is just popping into my head. There's a serial killer that they have found who was going after gay men.
Okay.
And the thing is, I think they've now gotten to the point where they have he's been convicted, I think, of 7 murders.
Holy cow.
And they think that there's more out there that they are not connecting. But something that I heard from the LGBT community of Toronto is that they've been telling the Toronto police for years that that they believed that this was going on, that people were just disappearing who shouldn't be disappearing.
Right.
And they weren't being listened to. They weren't being treated well, right? And I think you have to understand how that skepticism is not an all-purpose tool to wield the same way in every single situation. Right. So if there is a real danger to people out there, you can't just wait until, the proof of this drops on your head. You may have to be a bit more proactive.
Right.
Right. And you might have to investigate, and you might have to and you have to ask yourself questions like, okay, let's say somebody comes to me and says they believe somebody is out there killing people or disappearing people.
Right.
What are the risks and benefits of if I believe them and go ahead and investigate that versus if I choose to tell them to go fuck themselves?
Right.
What am I looking at?
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty big effect difference, right?
Right. So then you have to say, okay, so I'm going to act as if this were true.
Right.
Because God forbid I was wrong. God forbid I say, well, God,
quote unquote.
quote unquote. We need new language.
Yeah, no kidding.
But for, God forbid I was wrong and told these people to fuck off, and then more people died.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I mean, what's the worst that happens if I don't? What's the worst that happens if I go out and look at it and it turns out they were just, well, I've got egg on my face.
Right.
I look a little dumb.
Yeah.
So what?
Nobody died from looking dumb, right?
Right. So, and I don't think that the skeptics, I think they got a little too used to the one kind of claim.
Right.
The, hi, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, let me tell you about God, or I believe in ghosts or astrology, these claims that you can either pick them up or not, and it doesn't make a whole lot of difference in anybody's life. It's not an immediate thing. But if you're approaching something like Black women, their babies tend to die in the first year in America, right?
Okay.
There's a huge infant mortality among women of color in America. It's a real problem. So if you want to, and yet when I talk to people about that, who are in this quote unquote skeptic community, they accuse me of playing identity politics and being emotional. And it's like,
I don't think that's how that works.
should I not be emotional about babies dying for no good reason? Like, if there's,
right.
This is a phenomenon. I'm not making up the phenomenon.
Right.
You can investigate different reasons for it, but you may have to, before you even figure out exactly why, you may have to like start, okay, what's likely to be the case here?
Right.
And what can I do? Like, okay, I could provide prenatal services, and I did that and that's not helping. Well, let me look at this. Let me look at that. Let me look at the race issue. Is racism part of the effect here? And if so, then I've got to deal with that, right? Yeah. And it turns out that it is. They really are looking at it, and they're just finding that the sort of cumulative stress, the load that takes over time is having an impact on women above and beyond whether or not they have access to, the different prenatal care and vitamins and all of that. Even with that, because they have this lifetime of greater stress, this allostatic load is what they call it.
Okay.
That is affecting their bodies. It's affecting their pregnancy. It's affecting their children, because that's just how that works.
Right.
Even the men, their situation also has some impact. It's not as high on infancy, but we treat people as if the minute that they get pregnant is when the clock starts, and it isn't, right? On your body and on your health. It actually starts quite a bit before that. So.
Yeah, it seems if an effect is happening to a specific demographic of people, then it pays to understand why. Like, that's not identity politics, is it? That's statistical demographics. Like, that makes sense.
Well, there's no difference really in their mind. There's no, identity politics doesn't have a meaning really to them. So identity politics actually means a very specific thing that they usually are not talking about. It means people whose identity, and their connection with their identity has an impact on who they vote for or what their political opinions are. Right. It's literally, there's no judgment in it whatsoever, because it's true of everybody. Like, who would be the person that, their own life experience had no impact? That would be insane.
Right.
Atheists have identity politics, you know, but that's not usually what they mean. What they usually mean is something like, people are playing the race card, people are playing the gender card, which is their interpretation of people are talking about issues that don't affect me. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, therefore it's bullshit. Yeah. I don't know. It seems to be a problem almost without a solution unless somebody's willing to accept that, unless there seems to be a disconnect, right, with the way that we use some of these terms. Like, if you're using intersectionality and you're assuming that it's like a cult that is trying to take all the power away from men, which maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing.
In which case, where do I side?
But like, if that's what you assume it is and you don't want to lose power, then like, it doesn't give you the opportunity to engage with what is actually being said. Yeah.
And there's a refusal to do that. And it's a some people, it is a good faith confusion, especially because there's so much out there now, so much just words and people and opinions, and it all seems like a big soup, right? It's all confusing. And, but for some people, it really isn't, an honest, you know, this is, and I think one of the big problems is thought leaders.
Yeah.
That we have them. Yeah. That we have the ones that we do, that we, sort of look at them the way that we look at them, as if we need to protect them from criticism instead of holding them account to criticism, you know. Those, I think that the way that this developed, really ideally back when, the Four Horsemen put out a video calling themselves the Four Horsemen, like they should have gotten, you know, a huge blowback from people. If it had been an ideal world, everyone would have said, you know, guys, come on. Yeah. Get a grip. But instead, they were embraced. They were held up as icons of rationality. They were, and anyone who said, have you noticed that these icons of rationality are all old white dudes? Right. You know, anyone who said that was just being a complete asshole. But at the same time, that should have been something that people said, you know, like, this is not there's got to be a reason, right? That there is a, and that's a point I've made. Like, in the atheists, when you look at their, now I'm going to forget their demographics, they're white dudes mostly. Yeah. So there's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah. I think there's multiple reasons for that. And at least one of them is, like you say, the representation on stage or in videos and, speaking engagements. If you go to a conference and I mean, I made the same mistake because I didn't see it, right? Like when I organized a conference in 2016 here in Regina, I had a lineup of 5 white dudes. And then somebody was like, hey, maybe we should have a woman in here. And I'm like, hey, that's an excellent idea. But because of the representation that had always been in my face, my favorite atheist speakers were white dudes, because that's what I saw. And I mean, if we don't acknowledge that we have blind spots, then we can never make space for more diversity, right?
Right. And understanding that the way that in our society, the way that men and women approach religion and what they use it for, or the way that people of color connect with their religious communities may well be very different.
Yeah, for sure.
And may need a different sort of approach. And also, like there's a if you're coming out of a religious group that hated gay people, and you were gay, and you were sort of in the closet, now you're out. Now you're just starting to regain your self-respect. You're still wounded. You've had an entire lifetime of shame, about who you are, built up in you, right? And now you're out, so you go to an atheist conference hoping to find somebody who will take you seriously and not make you feel like an outsider in your own community. And guess what?
Right.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
So I think that, but you can't talk to people in the secular community and get them to just accept these things because, then you get, well, it shouldn't be any different. Well, life isn't about what should be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting problem. I mean, I've been plugging away at this kind of subject for a year and a half. I know there's been people who have been putting much more time into it. I was on the wrong side of things for a long time. So I don't have a solution except to just keep, like you say, just keep putting content out there and trying to get people to actually examine their own biases and their own blind spots.
Yeah. I don't know. It may be that the atheist secular community as we know it is just not going to work. It's just going to fracture.
True.
Maybe a new thing has to come up. Like a lot of possibilities exist. But I don't see anything getting better until people start actively deposing the current leadership, because the current leadership is this sort of white libertarian echo chamber.
Yeah, that's right. And the libertarian thing is problematic in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and of course, not all of them will fully say I'm a libertarian, but they all have those sort of leanings.
Right.
So.
They're all classical liberals now.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. Like I want to promote progressivism, but I want to promote critical thinking. And I find that the progressive YouTubers that I watch are doing a much better job of critical thinking than the skeptical people that I have read in the past or have read or watch on YouTube. So I wonder, is there some way we can make the progressive movement the new skeptical movement?
Well, I would like that to happen. We'll see. That would be great. The problem is that they kind of seem to have assumed that the only thing you had to do for skepticism was sort of own it. I'm going to be a skeptic now.
I got my ID card that says skeptic on it.
My junior skeptic kit is right here.
Yeah, that's right.
25 questions for rape victims. Right here.
Yeah.
But it would hope that if they could learn more, it's a question of humility.
Yeah.
And learning and not assuming that you're any good at it. I didn't get better at critical thinking by assuming I already knew how to do it.
Yeah.
I did it by actually going out and looking at methodologies of it.
Right.
Like, here are the questions that you should be asking. Here is, like, even today, I will, if I see an argument and I'm not sure about it, I'll write it down in your basic logical premise, premise, conclusion form, so that I'm real clear about what I'm looking at. Just because, sometimes you hear things and it's real easy to just go with your gut.
Yeah.
Logic is slow.
Yeah.
It is painstaking. It's not going to get you a lot of clicks necessarily. Sorry to say it. But it has, there is value in it. You know, a long time ago, I did a video, which unfortunately had to be taken down for a long story. But the idea of it was, instead of talking about what a logical fallacy is, let's talk about how to craft a good argument. How would you go about doing that?
Right.
What makes an argument good? Like,
that's an excellent topic, actually. Like, that would be something that I think a lot of people need to spend more time on. Right.
Like, we could both sit here screaming at each other, "You stop hitting me!" That isn't going to get anywhere,
right.
Any forward movement. So we'll see. I feel like because of their lack of ideas of their own and willingness, the best that they could do is slow people down who have something to say.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they're doing. And that's, that we have to just keep slogging away. And eventually, as with everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think that that's all that's happening too, right? Like, progress is being pushed, and it's difficult and it's frustrating and it takes time. But people who are pushing these ideas are making progress and are changing things. And all these old white men shouting at clouds can do is slow them down a little bit.
Yeah. And it's, I think we're looking at a backlash time.
Right.
A time when there's a lot of backlash against the progress. And I think part of that is you have to, you kind of have to get to the point of expecting that backlash, because there is, if you're going to be a person who's going to feel threatened by the success of others, that's just what's going to happen, because other people are going to have successes and then you're going to get threatened. And now you've got to, run out there and start talking about how intersectionality is the devil.
Right.
That's like all that you could do with that. And there's going to be a certain number of those people in society. And so you kind of have to sort of factor that in, but we're still going to keep going, and we're still going to get more progress, and we're still, because there's too much at stake to just give it up for white fragility and male fragility. And
that's right. I know, there's a lot of problems with Steven Pinker's kind of perspective on the way progress has worked. But I think that he is right in that society has made progress. I just think that, obviously he doesn't seem to account for why it happened, but
yeah.
But yeah, I think that we are making progress, and we have made progress. We just got to keep doing it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So I guess before I let you go, what is conservatism? The new counterculture?
God, no. It's the same old shit. It's just the same. There's always been an aggressive conservative element, which is a bit of a contradiction in terms.
Right.
But what the Alex Joneses of the world is not are doing is not all that different from what the Rush Limbaughs were doing, which is not all that different from, if you go back, there were old school preachers and people that used to go around and do basically the same stuff. So as far back as you go, there's always been an angry conservative that is just mad because the world isn't the world is never in a golden age, which means they always think the golden age happened some 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, they look back at a romanticized version of the past and be...
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I saw your one video where you were debating about is conservatism the new punk rock or whatever it was. One of my favorite early videos, actually, from last year that I was watching.
Oh, thank you. That was fun. Eventually, we're going to finish that debate series up.
Yeah.
Phil Moriarty, who I had with it, he has a job and stuff.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah. Those damn jobs are a pain.
They are. I don't know.
All right. Well, I guess, where all can people find your stuff?
Well, I am Chrisiousity on YouTube. I have a Facebook page, which says Chrisiousity, and my Twitter account is @Chrisiousity. So it's not that hard to find me.
And there's a U in Chrisioity.
Yes, there is. There's a U in it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I guess.
I guess I can see why I spelled it wrong, but it makes more sense to have the U there.
Well, there seems to be a couple of different spellings for curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
I think I just went with one of them, and so I get yelled at like that's the English spelling or something. And,
oh, okay. Yeah. Being a Canadian, I probably should have put the U in there. But
or maybe the other one is I don't know.
I know we like to put a lot of U's in our words, like behavior and stuff like that. Yep. Color.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right, so that's the end of the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I had a blast talking to Chris, and I really appreciate her perspective. I recommend that you check out her videos, and if you like them, then head over to Patreon. And while you're deciding what level of patronage to give to Brainstorm, you should go and give her some support as well. I'll put links to that as well as her YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Twitter in the show notes. I really want to thank Chris for talking to me. And if you don't want to wait and check the show notes, then you can find her stuff on YouTube by searching Chrisiousity. That's with a U. This is another one of the episodes that I finished off before my chat with Aaron was published to the public, so there isn't any feedback, but I will do a lot of listener feedback and stuff as soon as I'm working on the next batch of episodes. So, before I do my regular outro stuff, I want to thank all the top patrons: Bassett Sammy, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Daryl Goosen, Aaron Young, William Driver, and Positively Skeptical. If you want a special thank you in each episode, then go to patreon.com/brainstormpodcast and become a patron at the $5 level or higher. For everything else, you can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com or our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters: Bassett, Keith, Kim, Janet, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Bob, Glenn, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Chris, and Larry. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or go buy some stuff at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi for doing the intro voiceover. You can find his podcast at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.